Okay, and fucking A, it's time for Let's Argue, where I take on all your hot takes, unpopular opinions, and tough questions about anime. It's a ripoff of a show that Anthony Fantano does, but I'm an anime guy, so it's a little bit different. Boole says, as much fun and as easy as it is to make fun of newer fans who only watch seasonal anime and haven't really gotten a chance to build up a diverse taste, they're largely the reason anime is still alive and thriving today. I remember circa 2014-2015, anime certainly looked like it was getting pretty close to death, with big studios closing left and right and money running dry. Then all of a sudden, the now coined ironic weeb era came through with breakout hits and propelling anime into the mainstream over here in the West. I don't know about your timetable here. I mean, 2010 was when it looked like anime studios were closing, like a lot of big stuff, you know, Madhouse going bankrupt, Gonzo splintering into pieces, but all of this led to new studios forming out of their ashes, oftentimes multiple new studios. So if anything, the early 2010s was an era of tons of new things going on, new studios opening up and trying to get their footing, you know. For instance, Gainax sort of splintering into 3 different studios, and now we've got Trigger, Gaina, and I think Gainax still exists in some form, but like, I don't think any of this has led to an overall decline. Like, I think that there's a lot less sure footing for each of these organizations. It seems like there's fewer anime that have like the sheer amount of production behind them, the more centralized productions, because of the fact that, again, we've splintered off into all these smaller groups, so every production is kind of smaller and there's more of them. Animators are being spread thin across more productions, so I don't know if it's ever really looked to me like anime was going to die. I don't know if it's this influx of new fans in the West have really affected the industry in any major way. It's more like the changing of buying habits globally. I mean, for instance, the death of the OVA. Like, obviously, OVAs became really difficult to sell in an era where as soon as something comes out, it's going to be uploaded onto the internet, and people just don't want to have to pay for it if they don't have to. That goes for American or Japanese fans. So that just became kind of an untenable market, except for things that are tied into major properties already. So like, but now we have the rise of the ONA and, you know, the rise of Netflix. So I don't think any of this really has to do with like how many new fans there are, as opposed to just the way that things are naturally shifting because of technology. Jacob says, Summer Wars is a boring clusterfuck that falls apart at the end and was never interesting. I don't know how you could have this opinion. Summer Wars is super fun. It's a really interesting take on like a big family scenario, not something you necessarily get a lot of in anime, those like big multi-generational Asian families having like a gigantic get-together with this powerful matriarchal figure who, you know, has this like incredibly badass moment before the end. You've got really cool animation, some great fights, just really lively production. I think Summer Wars is a fucking blast. I love that movie. Bruh asks, why do anime characters explain jokes after they're told? Somebody actually asked a tough question instead of just giving it a popular opinion. I don't think it's so much a matter of explaining the joke as reacting to it. There's a very popular style of comedy in Japan where you have the boke and the tsukomi. The boke is the idiot, the tsukome is the straight man. So basically one character says something ridiculous and then the other one chastises them for having said something ridiculous. It's something that I think is easily lost in translation if you either are watching a dub or maybe if the subtitles don't really convey the difference in the intonation of how each character is speaking. You really have to pay attention to how the delivery is. You know, a lot of it is just sort of pointing out how ridiculous what the character just said is, because I think this has to do with Japanese culture and like the idea that individualism is kind of laughable in and of itself. Like, doing something besides the norm is so like frowned upon in their culture that just pointing out that someone is doing something abnormal is funny in and of itself. Definitely a very Japanese brand of humor, and I get why a lot of Westerners don't appreciate it, but the more of it you experience, the more you can kind of understand the flow of that comedy and what makes it enjoyable. The Anime Binge Watcher says that Angle Beast is oddly underrated for how popular it is. Making it one cour was the right choice, as it gives the show some of the tightest writing I've ever seen. Just the first episode alone is a masterclass in story setup. Interesting take. I mean, one of the biggest problems that people have with Angel Beats is that it is so just like slammed into a tight space. The story beats are happening constantly. The tone is always whiplashing left and right. And it was originally intended to be a longer show. It was a very truncated production. This has been, chronicled. A lot of people shit on the show for that reason. Personally, that's exactly what I like about it. I like that it's so unhinged, that it doesn't waste your time, that it's always going in a direction you don't expect. I mean, if you're somebody who's coming at it from the perspective of like, I want this story to make the most sense and be the best that it possibly can be, I understand why you would not enjoy this show. But for me, I don't really care about the story. I care about the experience of the story. And I think it was more fun because it was so fucking ridiculous. Ryan Combs says, One Punch Man 2's animation, or lack thereof most of the time, isn't even the worst thing about the new season. The direction is much worse. I mean, I'd be willing to believe this is true. I haven't watched the new season yet, but I think that when people talk about the visuals in a show, most people don't really have the lexicon to describe like exactly what they mean. Like, people will say bad animation when maybe they mean bad artwork, bad design, bad directing. Like, the point is that the visuals are the problem. I definitely would encourage people to start using the phrase bad visuals as opposed to bad animation if you're not specifically referring to the animation. But then again, there are some people who say things like, this anime has bad graphics, and then I just go, well, I get what you're trying to say. Mario says, if you watched K-On! For the first time today, you would find it boring and think that nothing happens. And this is referring specifically to me and my opinions. I don't know, like, when I saw K-On! When it came out, I wasn't exactly a huge fan of it. Like, I thought it was good. I liked that genre of shows. But what's made K-On! Grow for me is the comparison to all the other shows of its ilk. It's the realization of just how much effort was put into the show, how well directed it is, how the timing and pacing of scenes is so interesting, how great the voice acting is, how detailed the setting is. If you watch my video K-On! The Ultimate Adaptation, I go into a lot of detail about that. That was not all stuff that I immediately recognized about the show. I made it through the first season thinking it was above average for the genre. It was only when I got to the really emotional core of Season 2 that I really loved it, and then when I went back and watched Season 1, it was like having the expectation that I know this is going to be a really fulfilling show, and that these characters will develop, and that there will be like a deeper meaning to their relationship. When you go back and watch the early episodes and you see the seeds of that already beginning, it's like, oh wow, this is even better than I realized the first time, because I didn't make the assumption that this was going to go somewhere when I was first watching it, So I think I'd probably experience it the exact same way I did last time. I would start off thinking, well, this is, as cute girls shows, this is above average, the animation's really great, the directing's really great. If anything, I think I would have a better appreciation for that stuff on the first viewing than I did back then, as back then I was just I would watch anything that had 4 cute girls in it pretty much. Torner says, WWE is a better shonen than most shonen anime. Okay, that seems ridiculous to me. I mean, WWE has way more filler than any shonen, way more garbage plot twists, way more of the author being a fucking moron. I mean, it's kind of funny. With wrestling over the last 10 years, we've seen this rise in its prominence in internet culture because of the fact that so many people who remember, loving wrestling as kids are coming back to it, being able to analyze it, talk about why it was so interesting to them. And, there's been tons of great videos about wrestling. Endless Jess was doing it first. Emp Lemon's done videos about it. Guys like Super Eye Patch Wolf. And while a lot of them like to fixate on how good it can be at its best so that they can communicate it to the audience, ultimately, most wrestling fans spend most of their time pissed off. Most of the time, things don't go well. Most of the time, they're complaining. So it's like, to say that, just because at its height it can be really great, well, that's also true of most shonen, but I don't think most of them are nearly as frustrating for nearly as long as the WWE is. Bacon Delish says Sword Art Online gets more hate nowadays because it's a meme to hate it. Most people that actively hate it now have not actually watched it and don't know why it's bad, only that it is. I think that's probably true. I mean, Sword Art Online is one of the most popular anime of all time. It's greatly beloved by a huge number of people. It's got toys in, you know, the Hot Topic and FYE. You can hear the opening theme playing in a Spencer gift store, as I have before. Like, it is a fucking massive show. I don't think that most people would instantly dislike it if they saw it. I think that a lot of people would probably be let down by the second half of the first season, but I think the average viewer, had they never heard anything negative about it, would perfectly enjoy those first 14 episodes. And like, even for me, when the show was airing, I watched 7 whole fucking episodes of the thing, and you know how quick I am to drop stuff, so it's not like I think Sword Art Online is obviously bad. I think it's something that falls apart not only as it goes, but the more you think about it, and I definitely think that, you know, the average viewer probably wouldn't make it through all of the seasons because the problems compound on themselves and become more obvious as it goes along. But certainly, the show would not have nearly the level of bad reputation that it has if it wasn't so lucrative to shit on it. You know, when I shit on it, I didn't know that it was going to be lucrative until it was, but once it had been proven, a lot of other people jumped on that bandwagon and made a fuckload of money, and now it's a popular opinion to have. So, yeah, I definitely think that a lot of the SAO hate is bandwagoning. Steffi Misk says, Baby Steps' art direction is largely the reason why it's ignored at first glance. Otherwise, I'd argue it's one of the best sports anime of all time. Honestly, I just want people to go check it out. It's hella good. Hard agree. The biggest problem with Baby Steps is the production. In fact, I would say this is a great example of that one guy in probably a couple videos ago who had said that you can't have a show with bad production and great writing and it come out good. Baby Steps is a perfect example. The production is awful. The animation looks like shit. The soundtrack is bad. It's still greatly enjoyable. I loved the whole first season. Like, the main characters are just so lovable, and the story is paced well. It's a sports career narrative, which is more interesting to me than an inter-high narrative. I think it's one of those that, like, I feel like I could watch it forever just because the characters are so fun to spend time with. And I definitely think that the case could be made that the anime is not really worthwhile if you have the manga, because the manga art is a lot better than the anime art. But yeah, Baby Steps is super underrated, and by far the biggest reason is that it looks like dick. The Anime Binge Watcher says Angel Beasts... The Anime Binge Watcher says Angel Beast is...